Good afternoon or good morning. This is Amanda Berkson-Chilcott from National Skills Coalition. We'll be getting started with the webinar in about 2 minutes. Good afternoon. If you're just joining, this is Amanda Berkson-Chilcott with National Skills Coalition. We'll be getting started in about 1 minute. Well, good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast or in the Midwest. Good morning to those of you in the Mountain States and on the West Coast. And if we have listeners beyond that in Alaska or Hawaii, we welcome you too. And we thank you for getting up early. This is Amanda Berkson-Chilcott. I am a senior fellow with National Skills Coalition, and we are proud to be co-presenting today's webinar, Immigration at the Local Level, How Counties Can Use Workforce and Adult Education Policy to Strengthen Inclusion. Just a couple of very quick housekeeping notes. You are automatically muted entering the webinar today. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A box, which is located in the black bar at the bottom of your screen, to submit your questions in writing. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording and a copy of the webinar slides, as well as several handouts that the webinar presenters will be talking about following today's webinar. So you will have all of that material sent to you in an email to whichever email address you use to register for today's webinar. So we are delighted to welcome several hundred of you to join us today for this discussion. I think it's going to be a really full and rich one. You'll hear briefly from a couple of us, and then you'll hear a sort of more substantive presentation around some examples from me at the sort of national level of some state and local examples across the country. Then we're going to be drilling down a bit deeper with one of our presenters, Brittany Ford from Lucas County, Ohio in the Toledo area. And then we've left a robust 20 minutes for Q&A to really delve into the questions that you have about this material. So again, my name is Amanda Berkson-Chilcott. I'm going to ask Erin to unmute herself and just say a quick hello here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Amanda. This is Erin Hurley with the National Association of Counties. Very excited to be here today. I serve as the Associate Legislative Director for NACO's Human Services and Education portfolio, as well as the staff liaison for our Immigration Reform Task Force.
Great. Thank you so much. And Brittany, if you want to unmute yourself and say hello.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Ford. I'm a policy analyst in Lucas County, Ohio for our Planning and Development Department in the Toledo area. That is our Workforce and Economic Development Department. I've been in this role for about 2 years and have been with the county since 2013. In addition to that, I also staff our Welcome Toledo Lucas County or Welcome TLC initiative as co-lead, and I'll talk about some of those things today. Quick forewarning, I also woke up with a nasty cold today, so I might cough from time to time. So I apologize in advance.
All right. Thank you, Brittany, and thank you for making the effort to join us despite the ups and downs. So we're going to turn now back to Erin, and I do want to say we are very appreciative of NACO, the National Association of Counties, for collaborating with us on this webinar. I had the pleasure of speaking at the NACO annual meeting in Las Vegas this summer, or actually, as we say, in Clark County, Nevada, which hosted the annual meeting. And we had a really robustly attended session with a lot of state and local leaders, including some who many of you may know, Min Zhao from Salt Lake County in Utah, talking about what they're doing on immigration. And the discussion was so robust that Erin and I chatted about it afterward and sort of dreamed up this webinar as a continuation of that conversation and a way to bring into the room with us a lot of you who are not able to be at that meeting in Clark County. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Thanks so much, Amanda, and sharing similar sentiments with you. We are extremely excited for the opportunity to co-host this webinar with the National Skills Coalition and, of course, continue the conversation on how counties can work to effectively integrate immigrant populations into their communities. So to start off my portion of the webinar, to understand NACO's and counties' role in this issue, I wanted to touch on what NACO's Immigration Reform Task Force is and some of the work we have been involved in over the years. Given the central role of county governments in ensuring the health and safety of all members of local communities, county leaders are really important stakeholders in discussions related to federal immigration policies. NACO's Immigration Reform Task Force, which is comprised of about 40 members, from county elected officials from across the nation. This group was actually created as a way to discuss the impact of federal immigration policy on local governments and communities, and to engage with federal decision makers on matters related to immigration. And the task force has been instrumental in guiding NACO's policy around immigration. And this work has been helped over the past year and a half by our members' development of what we refer to as bipartisan immigration consensus principles. And these principles cover a range of immigration issues touching on comprehensive immigration reform, public safety and law enforcement, supportive services and well-being, and of course of importance for today's webinar, workforce and the economy. And based on our membership's recent work around immigration issues, I'd like to highlight the specific intersection of immigration and workforce at the local level. So with that, when it comes to delivering career resources to local job seekers and businesses, counties are really on the front lines. And within this broader economic landscape, we recognize immigrant labor and expertise as being vital to our local economies. And this is an issue we've heard from our members repeatedly during our task force meetings, as well as, of course, similar to the session that Amanda participated in at our annual conference. Specifically, counties have an interest in ensuring that our employers and industries can hire and retain a qualified and legal workforce that really ultimately helps strengthen our local economies. And to give you a sense of how counties are involved with providing career and education resources that reach immigrant populations, NACO's research on county economies shows that more than 90% of counties participate in economic development activities, such as workforce development and business recruitment and retention. And this research also shows that workforce training is a top goal for local officials as we plan economic development activities. And in terms of specific legislation, I did just want to highlight the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, also known as WIOA for short, and that this legislation is an important vehicle for counties serving immigrant populations, especially in terms of career readiness and education. Under WIOA, states and local authorities are required to administer 6 core programs focused around providing workforce, education and training resources to job seekers and businesses. And one of these 6 core programs is the Adult Education and Literacy Program, aimed at reaching adults with barriers to employment, with an emphasis on English language learners and immigrants. Counties also play a major role in operating more than the 2,400 American Job Centers across the country. These centers partner across local agencies, social services providers, and businesses to provide one-stop career services that cater to the needs of local residents, including immigrant populations. Centers work to meet the unique needs of individuals who face substantial linguistic and cultural barriers, including immigrants, refugees, and new Americans. Also, services provided at the American Job Centers can help address individuals' challenges with English proficiency and cultural competence, such as through workforce-based English language classes and mock interviews that help individuals learn cultural and workforce nuances. And so finally, to really recap this information, counties have a very important role to play in providing career and education resources to immigrants in our communities, as well as supporting our local economies and industries. Counties are involved in this process from multiple angles, from our investments to economic development activities, to tailoring career resources to meet the diverse needs of local residents and businesses. And kind of in terms of next steps and looking ahead, NACO's Immigration Reform Task Force, as well as our broader membership, will remain engaged on this issue, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end of today's webinar. And again, thank you so much, National Skills Coalition, for organizing this webinar. We're really excited to participate, and with that, I will turn it back over to Amanda.
Great. Thank you, Erin. And just as a reminder, we have several hundred of you listening today. Some of you are county officials. Some of you are nonprofit staff members. Some of you are leaders in community colleges, in workforce boards, in a variety of different contexts. We will be talking a lot about county-specific examples, but we'll also be talking about other state and local examples that could be implemented at the county level. So I'm going to spend about the next 12 to 15 minutes sort of giving a quick overview of some of the policy levers that are available to you as local leaders and some examples. All of these are going to be very brief, and that's deliberate because we wanted to give you as many examples as possible. But what that means is if you like one of these examples, you're probably going to feel like you didn't get enough detail. Luckily, we have solved that problem. We will be sending, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, a follow-up email with a link to some additional resources, and we do have a robust 20 minutes at the end of today's webinar for your questions. So that's our approach. Let's just start with some context here, right? We know that American communities are increasingly diverse in terms of age and demographics, other demographic categories, and American businesses are very eager to find skilled workers. So those two sort of pieces of the puzzle are happening at the same time. We know American communities are also trying to build inclusive economic vitality. What does that mean? How do we help small and mid-sized businesses grow where they are? Erin touched on this when she said that 90% of counties are engaged in some economic development strategy. And we know that it's not just about big game hunting and trying to get a big employer to come to town, but it's also trying to help small and mid-sized employers get the workers they need so that they can grow where they are. That's a really important piece of the context. And you, as local leaders, are really at the forefront of each of these issues, the increasing diversity, the need for skilled workers, the need to do inclusive economic development. So we're glad that you're here for today's discussion, and we just want to situate with some very brief data to remind everyone 1 in 6 workers in the United States is an immigrant. 1 in 10 speak English as a second or third or fourth language. And while we think that the debate on unauthorized immigration is really important, and we know that many of you are working on this issue, it's important to recognize that 3/4 of immigrants do have legal status. So if you're located in a county where you're concerned that the discussion around workforce development might get diverted into an unproductive debate about legal status, it's important to recognize that even if the legal status debate sort of disappeared tomorrow, we'd still have a lot of opportunities and some challenges in making sure that authorized immigrant workers were integrated into the workforce. So we know that every community has a variety of levers that they can use to improve immigrant integration in the workforce. And I've listed out the levers here that we're going to walk through in today's conversation. So the first, of course, is investing in workforce development and adult education programs. Sometimes that can mean spending the county's own money out of the budget. Other times that can mean kind of creative uses of funding coming from the state or the federal level or from private sector partners. One example of a lever is adult education. It's an area where you can support both U.S.-born and immigrant workers. And it gives you an opportunity to, again, help local employers grow where they are by upskilling their incumbent workers. I heard a great example today from Kansas of a hospital system that's expanding into rural areas. They had a great need for entry-level patient care technicians and other beginning-level positions, and they were struggling to find qualified workers. When they created an adult education program that helped people to build those skills, they were able to help the hospital be able to meet its hiring needs. We also have some great examples from other parts of the country. In El Paso, the Socorro Independent School District has used some of their WIOA Title II funding. You heard Erin talk about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act at the beginning of today's conversation, as well as other adult education funding from the local school district to support an integrated education and training program that helps people to learn both basic skills in English or reading or math at the same time as they're training to become a jail officer or an electrician or an IT specialist. In Seattle, the City Council funded the Ready to Work program, which is for the lowest level English learners, those who are not being well served by the existing community college system. In Boston, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, known as MassMEP, was able to provide a pre-Lean ESOL class, so an English class for manufacturing workers who were about to go through Lean manufacturing training with their English-speaking colleagues and wanted to be on an equal footing. Another lever that counties and local areas can use is around educational technology. We know from the research that blended learning models, that is those that combine a technological piece like a mobile app or distance learning component with an in-person component like a classroom teacher or a technology coach, can be really effective in tackling local needs. We see this in New York State, in the upper part of New York State, where there's a lot of agricultural industry, a lot of immigrants who are working on farms. They can't easily get to classes if they're working on a dairy farm, working really long hours. So CEL-Ed, which is a mobile phone program to learn English, has been a really effective example for them. In California, we saw a partnership with the California Labor Federation and a number of additional partners, including World Education's Ed Tech Center, on a mobile learning initiative known as Mobile Up. Other states and counties and local areas have done sort of creative uses of federal funding. Erin talked earlier about how local areas are often administering the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The Title I funding for that includes something called the Governor's Reserve or the Governor's Discretionary Funding. This is more flexible than other WIOA funding, and some states have used it in really creative ways to support immigrant and refugee workers. In Maryland, the state labor agency released a request for proposals that encouraged local workforce boards to partner with a local adult education program to create career pathways. This was not limited to immigrants, but 2 out of the 3 programs that were funded were focused on English learners. In California, the state put out an RFP and funded 5 local areas to have an English language learner navigator who was a staff member at the local one-stop career center who could help immigrants kind of navigate that process. And in Michigan, they've used the WIOA Governor's Reserve funding for a whole host of initiatives, many of which we've written about on the National Skills Coalition website and in the publication that I'll be sharing with you at the end of today's webinar. There are 36 states that have gotten U.S. Department of Labor apprenticeship grants. Typically, those are distributed through a state labor agency. In a couple of states, notably in Idaho and Maryland, there have been initiatives that particularly targeted immigrant job seekers to be one of the populations served by those apprenticeship grants. Really interesting examples there. Other federal funding that counties and local areas have used to support immigrant workforce development is listed on this slide here. And some examples, both Washington and Oregon, their community college systems have done some tremendous work using the SNAP Employment and Training Funds. So this is matching funding that comes down from the federal government to support people who are leaving food stamps to find better education and employment. And the programs funded include some really innovative programs serving immigrants and English learners in both of those states. It's particularly notable because it doesn't just cover tuition or instructional costs, but these funds can also be used for things like childcare, transportation, materials, books, work boots, all the things that we know can be a cost that hinders immigrants from being able to complete a job training program. In New York State, the state put out a request for proposals, again, targeting all areas of the state, not just the metro New York City area, with community services block grant funding, and being creative about having a navigator who could help immigrants access public services that they were eligible for. In Boston, the Community Development Block Grant helped fund some really innovative English language programs run through the Office of New Bostonians and the Office of Workforce Development in Boston. In Rhode Island, the Institute for Museum and Library Services grant that the Providence Public Library got helped to found a learning lounge for adult learners that targeted American-born workers with disabilities or who didn't finish high school, as well as immigrants who had English language needs. Of course, there's other ways to think about how local areas can invest as well. That includes being pretty imaginative about a mandate that maybe your governor or your mayor or your county executive has kind of already put everybody on the hook to accomplish. For example, we know there are 43 states and a number of local areas that have set a post-secondary attainment goal. You'll often hear these talked about as 60% of our population should have a post-secondary credential by the year 2025. And states and localities are increasingly realizing they're never going to get to that goal just by focusing on kids coming out of 12th grade and going right into college. They also have to think about adults, and not just US-born adults, but also immigrant adults. So that can be a lever to sort of grab the attention of your county executive, your board of regents of your community college or your university system, your governor, to say, hey, you all have outlined this ambitious goal. We have some ideas for how you can get to that goal if we better target immigrant workers and adult learners. Industry sector partnerships are another example. These are sort of collaborations that typically involve a training provider and a group of employers in the same industry. So perhaps it could be a group of hospitals or a group of manufacturers. These are a group of competitors, right? Employers who are in the same industry competing with each other, but they come to the table to identify their talent needs and to say, okay, well, if you're going to be hiring 3 machine operators and I'm going to be hiring 3 machine operators and he's going to be hiring 4 machine operators, can we create a training program that's kind of a pipeline that will create that machine operators that all of us need to hire? And again, that's something which when a sector in an inclusive way really assisted navigate those pathways. There's also workforce program data, right? And so there's a big question about sort of our county might be funding a lot of job training programs. How do we know which ones are working well for different workers? Are some of them working especially well for men or for youth or for immigrants? In Minnesota, they've done a really interesting initiative, state labor agency, which is called DEED, is required to look at data and break it down, not just by Black, white, Latino, Asian, but by major subcategories like American Indian or Somali immigrants, to understand who are the job training programs and what can we learn from areas that are kind of springboards or bottlenecks. And then, of course, there's some municipalities that have just enacted really interesting original programs of their own. And the example I want to highlight here is from Philadelphia. It's a municipal fellowship program that, while it first targeted immigrants, can also be used to target American-born folks who have barriers to employment or returning from incarceration or coming out of foster care. We have a really neat profile of this on the NSC website if you want to dig deeper. So the bottom line from everything I just zoomed through in the last 15 minutes is there isn't a single blueprint for how your county or your local area should approach this. But our hope is that by giving you just a taste of all of those different examples, we gave you some tools, and you know that when it comes down to it in your local area, it really comes down to the people you have. Who are your best allies? Who are your champions? Where do those champions work? And how can you build on their expertise to advance good policies for immigrant workers and for your community as a whole? So that's the end of my portion of the presentation. I'm going to be turning things over now to Brittany Ford, who will be speaking for another 15 or 20 minutes, and then we will be moving on to the Q&A portion of the program. And I encourage you, if you have questions that are popping into your mind now, please feel free to go ahead and type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen now. You don't have to wait for the end before you start asking those questions. So Brittany, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda. So I also want to thank NACO and National Skills Coalition for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in Lucas County and with our initiative, Welcome TLC. I'm planning to give you a bit of context for Lucas County and for Welcome TLC, and then highlight some of the projects that we hope are some practical, easy or medium lift examples versus formal long-term programs. Okay, I'm just trying to get access. Hold on one second. All right, there we go. So Welcome TLC is an initiative housed in Lucas County and governed by a steering committee of community partners, including our library, land bank, City of Toledo, and increasingly our business and local chamber community. It was founded in 2014 with resolutions of support by both the county commissioners and Toledo City Council, and its mission is to build a welcoming and inclusive community for immigrants, refugees, and people of diverse cultures. Why did we start this initiative? Because the Lucas County commissioners and our partners believe that a strong, resilient, and vibrant region is inclusive of immigrant, international, and diverse populations. And our data in Toledo and Lucas County continued to show that this was a small but growing community, and it was partially offsetting our local population loss. It was more likely to be college educated, more likely to start a small business. The data is about 2 times as likely to start a small business, highly skilled, and then also underemployed or unemployed. Okay, so Lucas County's population is over 429,000 and is located in the northwest bordered area, in part by Lake Erie and on the right in Michigan to the north. The city of Toledo is our county seat and has a population of more than 287,000, so we're a fairly mid-sized urban county. We are a manufacturing, logistics, and healthcare economy, and the surrounding region is a lot of rural agricultural work. Similar to many other post-industrial or Rust Belt cities and regions in the Midwest, our region is also aging and depopulating, so the population growth of the immigrant community is particularly of interest to our local economic development leaders. Okay, so here's a graphic from our recently released data report on the demographic and economic contributions of our immigrant and community here in Toledo. It's, again, small but growing. It's partially offsetting our local population loss. It's also fairly diverse. Our top 5 countries of origin are Mexico, China, India, Canada, since we're so close to the border, and Lebanon. And it's important to note that our welcoming initiative started with a group of partners sitting around a table in 2012 and 2013. From 2014 to 2017, we worked on building trust in the community, doing community conversations, building partnerships, and hosting events. It also meant it took us a while to get to institutionalizing the work in our county operations and in our partner organizations. These are the projects that I'll be talking about in today's presentation. Those really didn't start until 2017. In April of this year, Lucas County was designated a certified welcoming community, becoming the 2nd county in the country after Salt Lake County to become certified in the Welcoming America program. The Certified Welcoming Program centers around what's called the Welcoming Standard, which are key performance indicators of being a inclusive community or local government for immigrants. So I mentioned this for a few reasons. One, we like to celebrate this accomplishment. It was a lot of work. It's also important for us to institutionalize this work into our county operations, including our workforce and economic development operations. And then we've also had increasing interest from business and economic development partners in the certification that they want to be able to use this to sell our region nationally. And so interestingly, since we announced the certification, our local university has said they'll be using it in their recruitment of international students. So they're really excited to be doing that. So before I get to some of the slides around projects, I do also want to say that our Lucas County Planning and Development Department has workforce staff doing client services and business services. We contract out some of those services to a local nonprofit named Network that operates our local American Job Center or AJC, or our One Stop, which is in Ohio, we call those our Ohio Means Job Centers. And so in Toledo, that would be called the Ohio Means Job Center, Lucas County. So again, it took us a while to get to this point, but in 2017, we launched the Workforce and Economic Development Committee. 2 of our priorities I'll talk about today are workforce development and employer engagement. And so here's an example of a pretty low-key, easy lift project that we did. This was back in 2017, September of 2017, and was kind of the launch of the Workforce and Economic Development Committee. We brought in national and state partners for some initial trainings for our partners, as well as our workforce and our job center, our one-stop staff, on how to serve immigrants and specifically high-skilled, foreign-trained and foreign-educated immigrants. Our audience, again, was our workforce development and one-stop staff, adult education partners, including community college, English as a second language, or ESL providers, and local immigrant and refugee service providers and partners. Our trainers were our national partners, World Education Services and Upwardly Global, as well as the state of Ohio's Aspire office, which houses our adult education program. So more than 50 providers from the local community, including our workforce and one-stop staff, attended this training. We also included a separate meeting right before for those partners to come and learn about our one-stop and our workforce development services and how they can begin serving or continue but grow serving the immigrant community. Our goal for this portion of the event was to build bridges among these providers because we were hearing in our initial conversations with the one-stop that they really weren't seeing an immigrant they weren't seeing immigrant clients in the one-stop, and so this was a way to start having those conversations with both the immigrant service providers to make sure they were referring, and also so that they could start building those relationships. Language access and cultural competency is less a specific project and more an ongoing conversation as we started doing this work, and I want to highlight that. And so, as our One Stop has increasingly saw some of this population coming into their services, we have had to increase these conversations with them to make sure that they have a language access plan, to make sure that they're utilizing a language access plan, to make sure that its scope is beyond just Spanish, but also includes Arabic and other languages, and that, you know, we also continue to talk about cultural competency and make sure that there are cultural competency trainings. And so, you know, what we have communicated as we've tried to do this work with our workforce and One Stop partners is some of the immigrant and refugee service providers are not going to necessarily feel comfortable referring until they feel like these are key pieces that our workforce system, our One Stop provider have mastered. And then this is a easy training program idea. It's something that we did this summer with Upwardly Global for $75 per person for those that were workforce and One Stop staff. We utilized WIOA or workforce dollars. We piloted Upwardly Global's new training program through Jobversity called Ambassadors for Global Talent. And this reviewed how to work with immigrants, reviewed immigration statuses that are work authorized, discussed how to coach the U.S. job search to immigrants, and discussed things like professional licensing, foreign education and training and reskilling, as well as some cultural competency and linguistic competency needs that immigrants have. And this training was targeting practitioners of the workforce and One Stop system. So we had 32 practitioners complete the training. A little more than 40 took the training, but are still kind of in process of finishing. That's almost half of the staff in our One Stop and almost all of our staff in my department, my workforce development department. We are planning a phase 2 to get the rest of our staff trained, and also to put this out to our community partners who can pay for it through their own operations, or we may also create a scholarship program so that we can kind of incentivize some of our smaller nonprofits to go through the training. And then more info on this program is in the link on the slide. This is a resource we developed and released this summer based off feedback from our business services division and our economic development team called the Guide to Hiring Immigrants. They were specifically asking myself and some of my committee members in early conversations around how can we partner in business services and their outreach to local employers. And they were saying that they really needed something, a leave behind or walk piece or a marketing document to use with employers to talk about the opportunity to hire immigrants in Toledo and make clear. And so they really wanted to have something that they could bring with them, because they really didn't feel comfortable talking about issues and addressing questions of what about work authorization or visa statuses or sponsorships and things like that. So this document is 4 pages. On the 4th page is an overview of most common U.S. work visa types with eligibility and requirements. It also makes clear that those with green cards or legal permanent residents, refugees, and some asylum seekers are fully authorized to work, and that you can contact myself and some of my other Welcome TLC committee members, including an immigration employment attorney, for more information. So again, we also based this off of the St. Louis Mosaic Project's. They had a similar guide, and so we did not recreate the wheel on this. We just added some of our own personal information. And the last item we've done that we think has helped us meet some of our workforce and adult education goals is to partner with other organizations throughout the state of Ohio to advocate that the state invest in this work. And so last year, Governor John Kasich created the Ohio Office of Opportunities for New Americans. And so that office, Housed and Development Services, now has a state website of resources for Ohio's immigrant community, including state licensing charts for foreign trained immigrants, including in accounting and lawyers, medical doctors, engineers, WES or World Education Services career pathway charts, and we'll soon be coming out with a WIOA eligibility chart or workforce services eligibility chart for workforce service eligibility. And this is a document that's based off of something that Amanda and the National Skills Coalition did with the state of Michigan last year. So again, it's not recreating a wheel. They literally took what the state of Michigan had released and adjusted it to state of Ohio. And since these are our next steps, Welcome TLC and Lucas County are partnering on a conference on Thursday, October 10th in Columbus, Ohio, called the Refugee Integration Conference. This will be featuring topics including some of those that we talked about today, specific to workforce and economic integration of immigrants. We are also partnering with the state of Ohio and a local community college on early stages, but we're planning to develop a contextualized ESL class, or English as a Second Language class. And so that would mean that it would be co-located with a job training program in order to streamline the process for some of those in the local immigrant community to get to jobs or to get into job training. We are also looking at the second phase of our job diversity training to start by the end of the year. And lastly, we are patiently awaiting the new state of Ohio WIOA eligibility chart based off of the state of Michigan's eligibility chart. So, and with that, here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. I know that Amanda is planning to send out the guide to hiring immigrants with some of the follow-up documents as well. And if there's anything else I can assist with, please let me know. With that, I'll hand it back to Amanda.
Great. Thank you so much, Brittany. That was an enormously informative presentation. I know we have a lot of folks listening today who are themselves representatives in county government or civil servants in municipal and I know we also have a lot of nonprofit leaders and other stakeholders listening. I want to lift up a couple things I heard you say that I thought were particularly important. One was kind of starting with the data and using the fact that Lucas County has an aging population as part of the conversation starter about immigration, right? That population loss is a concern and that you want to make sure that you have a strong working age population to support retirees, and therefore immigrants are an important piece of the puzzle. That's not true in every area of the country, but it's true in many areas. And so my guess is there's a lot of people who are in a similar situation to Lucas County in that respect. And the data profile that you mentioned, I think, is something that would be a good starting point for a lot of folks who may be at the earlier stages of this process. I think it's also important that you mentioned that this took time, right? This didn't all happen in the first year or two that Welcome Toledo Lucas County was an initiative. This is something you've been building towards over a period of years. You mentioned the importance of nonprofit partners. You mentioned sort of basing your hiring guide off of the St. Louis Mosaic projects. If you all are not familiar with the Mosaic Project, they're an absolutely terrific initiative in St. Louis, Missouri, and they are a nonprofit, so they're not a county initiative, but they are supported through the chamber, the local chamber of commerce, and other key stakeholders in the city and county of St. Louis. So that's an example of how those nonprofit partnerships can be really important. So we've had a handful of questions come in already, and I encourage you to go ahead and submit as many questions as you can. We'd like to get to as many different questions as we can in the time that we have. So we've got two very quick ones to begin with. First, a question for Brittany about whether the conference that you mentioned towards the end of your presentation is an annual conference. Does that happen every year?
Yes, it's the third year that the conference has happened, and we are planning to have that on an annual basis. So if you can't make it to Columbus this October, please plan to attend Columbus next October.
Great. And I did have the opportunity to be at that conference last year. So if you're in the neighborhood, it's definitely worth your time. So second question is for Erin. Just a very quick question from a stakeholder. How do I know if my county is a member of NACO?
Good question. So actually on our website at NACO.org, you are able to look up under advocacy, you can actually look up our membership map that will identify if your county is a member of NACO. Additionally, I can work with Amanda for you to receive my email address, and I would be more than happy to work with you directly to see if your county is a member as well.
Great, thank you, that's very helpful. So Brittany, I want to come back to you. We have a question, I guess, from another nonprofit perspective, which is what advice do you have for a nonprofit person who wants to reach out to county officials or county employees like you?
So I think it's helpful to start with data and then also anecdotal stories of barriers and potential successes. And maybe some quick win opportunities. I like to frame sometimes things as if I can help you with a problem. I can help you accomplish this. Essentially, I'm going to softball you an idea and then help you get it done. So.
That's great. I think that's a really helpful frame for people to be thinking, like, what are my local municipal leaders kind of already on the gun to accomplish, and how can I help them see and connect the dots, how the immigration work that I'd like them to tackle will help them accomplish that broader mandate that they're already focused on. We've certainly seen examples from other parts of the country where there are initiatives around public health or two-generation strategies that are targeting parents and young children, and people have realized that immigration is a key piece of that puzzle. So we have a question about whether we have contact information for the IMLS grant recipient in Providence. The short answer is yes. I do have the folks at the Providence Public Library who led that initiative, and I'm happy to share that. Just drop me a quick email. I've already put my email out in the chat, but I'll put it out again. And you'll also be able to get my contact information in the follow-up email that we'll be sending after today's webinar. But the broader point I'd like you to know for anybody listening today is everybody's public library is eligible to apply for these Institute of Museum and Library Sciences federal discretionary grants. So it's a grant application, the federal government puts it out, your local library then submits an application saying how they'd like to spend the money. They can do lots of different things. They can include adult education, they can include digital skills, they can include English classes, GED or high school equivalency classes, workforce development. A library in Philadelphia actually got a big grant with a whole bunch of nonprofit community partners, as well as the city of Philadelphia and the local One Stop to do an IMLS grant focused on workforce. And the list of past grantees is publicly available on the IMLS website. So we'll send a link to that as well when we send out our follow-up email so that folks can take a look, see which grants your local community may already have gotten, or think about whether you might want to start a conversation with your local library. A couple of libraries in the country have really been leaders. The Hartford Library in Connecticut, libraries in Tennessee, libraries in Queens and Brooklyn, New York, have really been leaders in developing immigrant-focused adult education and workforce programs and services. So we also had some really interesting questions about braided funding, right? How do you braid? We owe a Title II funding for adult education along with SNAP E&T or other funding sources. There are folks in Texas that have done some really interesting work on this question, particularly with regard to WIOA Title I individual training account funding combined with other funding such as what's called ability to benefit, so really access to Pell Grant funding for adult education and then later post-secondary education students. There's work happening in Arizona with a nonprofit called Friendly House. The Arkansas Career Pathways Initiative, which is a statewide initiative but has lots of local work happening through Arkansas community colleges, that they're braiding TANF funds, temporary assistance for needy families, with other funding to move people along a career pathway. So I'm going to follow up with the person who asked this specific question with some particular contact names that he might want to touch base with. But if folks want to delve deeper on this question, we're happy to put you in touch with those folks too, and potentially at some point to maybe do a deeper dive webinar of what this might look like. Erin, I want to come back to you. A question from a person who's interested in knowing how they could get their county to join NACO's Immigration Reform Task Force that you mentioned.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Another good question. How the process works for a county to be involved in the Immigration Reform Task Force, you would need to, if you are a county elected official, you would need to work directly with your state association of counties. There is, again, another form on NACO.org that you would fill out expressing your interest to join the Immigration Reform Task Force, and then that would kind of kickstart the presidential appointment process for that specific county elected official. And again, similar to my previous answer, happy to provide my email address to you and walk you through that process to make sure that you are directed towards all of the correct documents and the specific process as well.
Great, thank you very much, Erin. So I have a question. I'm actually going to open it up to both of my panelists after I briefly touch on it. So there's a question, have you seen any unique solutions, particularly in rural areas, to transportation challenges? Our area struggles trying to connect people to both short-term and long-term training opportunities when public transportation is insufficient. So the first thing I'll say is that I have seen a number of areas try to tackle a blended learning approach so that people don't have to go in person to training the whole time, and they can actually get assistance via cell phone or tablet computer or by going to their public library's computer lab when they can't go in training personally. So that's been one sort of approach that folks have taken to trying to tackle that challenge. Another approach has really been around thinking through, is there a way we can band together a group of employers who are having staffing problems and use that to help our local community college think about having a satellite location, offering a 4-credit class in, for example, a worker center, what's often called a day labor center for immigrants, or offering at a community-based nonprofit so that people don't have to travel to the community college's campus in order to participate in training. Brittany, any examples you want to share that you've heard from either Ohio or elsewhere around rural access to training given transportation problems?
So transportation's a big issue in Toledo, but also in other parts of Ohio because our state legislator funds it so limitedly. So I've heard some other solutions. I know that our local public transit system has been partnering with Enterprise, the rental car organization, on a employer solution for getting employees to work in areas that are past their service area. So I know that that might be something that there's a public-private partnership somewhere that has something similar to that. And I would just concur that, an employer-led solution is also really great, especially if you don't have public funding already going towards public transit in any way in your rural region. I've heard of other apps that may help people coordinate rides to jobs and employment and training and things like that. I don't know how successful they are. I know I've heard of one is called, I think, Ride Amigo. Whether it's something that is a really good option, I'm not sure, but might be something to look into.
Great, thank you. And Erin, I know in July when I spoke at your annual meeting, one of my fellow panelists was from Morgan County, Colorado, which is a very rural area. Is there anything that you want to share from a NACO perspective about the rural question? And it's fine if the answer is no, just wanted to give you a chance to hop in.
Thank you, Amanda. Not too much to add. As you mentioned, definitely Morgan County, Colorado. They are very involved when it comes to integrating immigrant populations into their community and have worked to, really provide access to different work training opportunities. But specifically towards the question of transportation, Morgan County has not talked all that much about that specific issue, and haven't heard too much from our members about that either as well, since I will say this is kind of a new area that we're starting to get involved in.
Great, thanks, Erin. We had a request to just repeat the information about Arkansas. So the initiative is called the Arkansas Career Pathway Initiative. It's run out of the community college system. We will be sending a link to National Skills Coalition's paper about this initiative when we send our follow-up email. So you can take a look and learn more. So we have a really interesting question here about data. First, a thank you to you, Brittany. People are very interested in the Jobversity pilot and others. But a question about the fact that a local workforce board, which oversees 45 American Job Center locations and funding blended workforce services with public and private funding through WIOA, SNAP, HHS, Office of Refugee Resettlement, and so forth, really trying to think through how they would develop shared data tracking across all of those different funding streams. So I can share some brief information. Brittany, if you have anything you'd like to add, I'll leave it open for you to jump in. The National Skills Coalition works a great deal on data issues, particularly at the state level, around how states can kind of standardize the data that they're receiving and create either data interoperability agreements or other kinds of data sharing agreements so that people don't have to keep either duplicating the data collection they're doing or frankly can look across systems at common job seeker clients or adult learners that they're serving. So our expertise is more at the state level than at the local level on this question, but I'm happy to take this question back to our data folks. I will say that I know that there are a number of counties in California that are using the state's Launchboard system, which is a data warehouse, if you will, at the state level. Adult education consortia are kind of groups of adult education partners that come together to provide services. So that's one area where I know there's a lot of local thinking and talking about how do we look at data across funding streams and across systems, but in a coherent way so we can see how people are being served. The federal government has obviously put out a lot of money through what are called their workforce data quality grants to support state-level data systems. At the local level, I'm a little earlier in the process, but as I said, I'll our data folks in-house and respond individually to the person who asked this question. Brittany, anything you wanted to add about data and how you think about data in Lucas County? Oops, I think you might be on mute if you're trying to speak.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I think this is a tough one. I think Seattle, King County may be farther along on the continuum than us because we're not really at this point of talking about this. But I know that the state of Ohio has done some merging of data with TANF and WIOA through the CCMEP program. I don't know if that is relevant to this. I also know our local community has looked at collective impact strategies and data, shared data systems and things like that in the education and workforce space through the Strive Together Network, which is a national organization that has local affiliate initiatives. It's something I think the Toledo area has really struggled with. So I don't know if any of those things are helpful, but, maybe something, so.
Great. Thanks, Brittany. So we're coming to the end of our time together. I want to briefly touch on two last questions, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you all for joining us today. There was a question about whether there were successful local examples of work-based learning models or other stipends available to people during training that were targeting immigrants who are already employed but are underemployed. There is an initiative from the Baltimore Alliance for Careers in Healthcare that uses federal DOL apprenticeship money to target immigrant professionals in the health field and help them retrain and reskill in healthcare careers. It's a partnership with Johns Hopkins University Hospital. And there's also been some really interesting work that Global Talent has done in Idaho in helping folks pursue work-based learning. The Philadelphia Municipal Fellowship Model that I mentioned is also an example of this. It's a 3-month, 40-hour-a-week, $13 an hour fellowship targeted at immigrant professionals who are either unemployed or underemployed, and they actually work for city government in a municipal agency, the Department of Revenue, the Department of Water, the Office of Domestic Violence, whatever that might be, to get 3 months of U.S. workplace experience in their occupation or industry as part of a work-based learning strategy. The very last question was around public charge. This is a new regulation out from the Trump administration that's going to affect a number of immigrants. National Skills Coalition will be releasing a blog post and 2 short documents about public charge in the next week or so. One focused on adult education, one focused on higher education and community colleges. So if you're on our mailing list, which you are because you signed up for today's webinar, you will be receiving those publications. But if you have any additional questions about public charge, you can absolutely feel free to contact me. Again, my contact information will be in the follow-up email. Thank you all again. Thank you to NACO and Erin for co-sponsoring today's webinar. Thank you to Brittany and Lucas County for providing that really in-depth example for folks to learn from. We hope to hear you soon on another National Skills Coalition webinar or event. And in the meantime, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.